Mark's version of the Canaanite woman reads quite differently. Mark calls her a Greek and Syrophoenician by birth. The question at hand is, why? What purpose would writing about a Syrophoenician achieve? Mark wrote for a Greco-Roman audience that would not have resonated with Israel's prophetic vocabulary. His audience was largely non-Judean, Hellenized and Roman, unfamiliar with Israel's prophetic shorthand. Terms like Canaanite, lost sheep, or covenantal exile would not naturally communicate meaning to them. Instead of the archaic and biblically charged term Canaanite, he uses contemporary socio-political identifiers that make sense in the Roman world. Calling her a Greek describes her cultural and linguistic orientation, while Syrophoenician by birth identifies her regional origin in Phoenicia under Roman Syria. Mark's description answers a different question than Matthew's, not where the woman stands in Israel's covenant history, but how she would be categorized within the wider Greco-Roman world. These descriptions are not mutually exclusive. In the 1st century, identity was layered. A person could be culturally Greek, regionally Syrophoenician, and still be described, in biblical terms, as a Canaanite. None of these labels establishes genealogy. They describe culture, geography, and covenantal perception rather than bloodline. Mark is not correcting Matthew, nor is Matthew being careless where Mark is precise. Each is being precise in a different way, shaped by audience and purpose. Matthew's revival of the term Canaanite is especially telling. Since it was largely obsolete as an ethnic label by that time, its use is deliberate. Matthew is framing the story theologically, drawing on Israel's covenantal categories to underscore the tension between Israel's priority and unexpected faith. Mark, on the other hand, avoids theological shorthand unfamiliar to his audience and opts for descriptive clarity within the Roman social landscape. Together, these two descriptions strengthen the narrative rather than weaken it. From a Jewish perspective, the woman is an outsider. From a Roman perspective, she is non-Judean and culturally Hellenized. Yet, despite these layers of otherness, she recognizes Jesus as Israel's Messiah, accepts Israel's covenant order, and receives mercy without redefining Israel's role. The difference between Matthew and Mark tells us far more about the evangelist's aims and audiences than it does about the woman's ancestry. So Mark reframes the woman's identity using Roman cultural and geographic markers, Greek Syrophoenician by birth, to signal that she stands outside Judean religious society, not outside Israel's redemptive story. Mark is answering the question his readers would ask: if this movement concerns Israel, why do we keep encountering people who look non-Jewish? By identifying her as culturally Greek and regionally Syrophoenician, Mark shows how diaspora Israelites and covenant-adjacent populations appeared within the Roman world. To Roman eyes, such people were simply Gentiles. Mark's description explains why someone who looks Gentile, speaks Greek, and lives in Phoenicia nevertheless recognizes Israel's Messiah, understands covenant priority, and seeks mercy from Israel's God. Crucially, Mark does not soften Jesus' boundary statements. Jesus still insists that the children must be fed first. Mark does not reinterpret the saying or universalize it. Instead, he shows that the woman herself accepts Israel's covenant order. That matters for Mark's audience because it demonstrates that the gospel does not overthrow Israel's priority. It restores dislocated members of Israel's world without Romanizing the covenant. Mark's purpose, then, is pedagogical. He is teaching his readers how to interpret identity correctly. Roman categories like Greek or Syrophoenician are insufficient for understanding covenant belonging. Someone can be culturally Greek and still stand within Israel's redemptive horizon. Mark is quietly dismantling Roman assumptions about ethnicity and religion without adopting Jewish polemical language. In that sense, Mark is doing for a Roman audience what Matthew does for a Jewish one. Matthew challenges Jewish contempt for covenantally dislocated Israelites by calling the woman a Canaanite, a term loaded with Israel's own historical memory. Mark challenges Roman assumptions by showing that people Rome calls Greek may still belong to Israel's unresolved story. Both writers are addressing different misreadings of the same reality. Matthew confronts Jewish exclusivism that confuses covenant standing with purity performance. Mark confronts Roman universalism that confuses cultural identity with covenant location. Neither author turns the woman into a prototype for post-Israel, post-AD 70 Christianity. Instead, both present her as evidence that Israel's restoration necessarily involved people who no longer look Jewish by contemporary standards. So Matthew uses her to expose Jewish misrecognition, Mark uses her to correct Roman misclassification. Together, they show that the problem is not whether Israel's story is expanding beyond Israel, but whether either Jews or Romans properly understand who Israel actually is in the last days of the Covenant Age.